with the Corinthians. He's real flippant about their judgment. He says, I don't care. Judge me all you want. It doesn't matter. See, what the Corinthians, their idea of a minister was, 6'1", with slick back hair, probably about 190 pounds, maybe 7.5% body fat. A real big vocabulary, some charisma. Probably like a Joel Osteen type character, Instead, they had this short, probably, overweight, balding man that couldn't see very well. He possibly walked with a limp, and he had a rigid personality that had too high expectations for Christian living. The physical characteristics kind of resemble Leon. You knew that one was coming, didn't you? That's what Paul was. And the Corinthians, they wanted this like Samson-like character, with the flowing hair, and they got Paul instead. And so because do what? Yeah. So because that's what they got, they thought Paul was wrong. They set in judgment over him. And he said the rules in which you judge me, they don't count. And he goes on and even further, and he says, oh, and by the way, I don't even judge myself. I don't even examine myself. Now, at this point, I'm sure the Corinthians are thinking, Paul has got to be the most proudful man alive. And what he's doing is he's setting up the highest judgment there is. He said, God examines me. And there's no stricter judge in that. The one who has authority to examine me examines me. Most of y'all probably think that Sam was always kind of chasing after me when we were dating. But reality is, I actually had to woo her. And we dated for a few months, and then she broke up with me. And I believe I'm going to get in trouble for this, but there's a lot of people upset with me anyway. So I believe that her exact words were, "You are going to be a great man of God, but you're not that today." And she broke up with me. So I kind of like hatched. So the next year and a half was this devious, diabolical plan where I tried to appeal to every important person in her life while kind of ignoring her, because I thought, if I win her parents over, that'll be good influence. And she had 2 younger brothers. So my first kind of plan of action was, she had 2 younger brothers, and they were getting into paintball, and I had a bunch of paintball gear. So I gave it all to them. I spent time with them. We cleaned the guns up and took them paintball and stuff, and that didn't work, And so my next thing was, she was at college, and I had heard that she had a bad week, and so she was coming home. Well, along with her were some friends, so I called up the flower shop in Oak Grove. I knew my dad had an account there, so he paid for these flowers. Sorry, Sam. All these years I've been hiding that from you. So I called them up, and I knew when her and her friends were getting out of school, and I had spies everywhere. And I knew what time they were going to get home, so I had these flowers delivered to her house after she arrived, so that all of her friends would see that, and they thought, "Oh, what a sweet young man." All the while I'm trying to appeal to these other people, Sam can see, completely through this. But I'd been tricking myself into thinking that I was really appealing to pure motives, In reality, I was just trying to make Sam fall in love with me. Paul is not telling us, do whatever you want. That's not what he's saying here. When he says, I don't care about your judgment. He's not telling us, don't adhere to public opinion. He's saying that when God examines you, He looks at your pure motive. He looks at what the reality of the situation is. That as much as I enjoyed hanging out with her brothers, the only reason was to get to her. I remember my dad, he says this all the time, and it's still hard for me to understand. He told me one time he had 2 pairs of socks, and he couldn't decide which one to wear. And he had just read that verse that said, in all things pray. And he said he got on his knees and for 15 minutes prayed through which pair of socks to put on. I think the point of what he's trying to say and what Paul is saying is that for God to look at our pure motives, we have to be on our knees. We have to be in a humble submission to Him. God will bring justice. He continues on in verse 5 and says, "Therefore do not pass judgment before the time." Now, I want you to understand something. Paul's getting ready to go and say, don't judge one another. But what you have to realize, and this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, is that in chapter 5, he's going to tell us to judge those in the church. So let me explain how the two can coincide. Y'all know I don't like sweets. I don't eat cake. I don't eat pie. I don't eat ice cream. But I like sweet tarts. I know it's weird. I love sweet tarts. Now, as a matter of fact, to get ready for this sermon, I had a couple packages of sweet tarts in my office. I eat sweet tarts like twice a year. Not very often. But if I began to eat sweet tarts for every meal, if that was my only nourishment, then my teeth would begin to rot because the sugar would begin to break them down, and I would have a stomach ache, and eventually I would really have physical ailments from malnutrition. But if I just eat sweet tarts every once in a while, they're good, and they make me want to have them again. That's kind of what Paul's talking about in judgment. Our daily lives, we have to have proper nutrition. We don't walk around casting judgment on one another. But every once in a while, when sin is prevalent to such an extent that we have to throw one to Satan in order for him to come running back to the loving arms of Christ, we're called to do that. We'll get into that message more later, but for right now, in our day-to-day lives, we do not